Good morning, everybody. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about a few chapters that appear in week 3 of our reading, and these are a recap of Ezekiel 12 through 14. The 3 chapters have some interesting topics to them, and so I wanted to take them one by one. For Ezekiel 12, we're talking about the idea of sign acts. Okay. The section is introduced by the phrase, Vayehi davar Adonai Eli lemor. The word of the Lord came to me, saying. The phrase is known as a prophetic citation formula. It's very frequent within the prophetic books, and in our terms of talking about text world theory, it acts as a world builder. It's going to build a new section for us because of the Hebrew term lemor, which comes from the verb amer, to say or speak. So this word to Ezekiel contains instructions. He's supposed to act out a sign. He was to gather together gear to take into exile, and then wait for dark, and to act out being taken into exile by breaking through a wall, carrying out all his gear in the dark with his face covered so that he could not see. And there's something significant there about him not being able to see that connects this part of the text with 2 Kings 25, 1 through 7, which is relating the sign act to King Zedekiah. And it describes basically what would happen at the fall of Jerusalem, where Zedekiah would be leaving Jerusalem through a breach in the wall, unable to see where he was being taken. The section itself speaks to this theme of immediacy. The destruction of Jerusalem is inevitable. Babylon is God's doing, and both Jeremiah and Ezekiel and even Daniel all address the issue. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. It's going to happen now. So there's not really much time to do any redress. There's no time to repent because that time is now over with. Ezekiel 13 takes on the issue of false prophets. The section is also introduced by the phrase, Vayehi davar Adonai Eli lemor, the word of the Lord came to me saying. And this section reveals the hubris of the false prophets who had a tendency to speak a word, claim that it was from God, and then sit back and wait for God to fulfill it. This, of course, is not how prophecy would work. Obviously, the word of the Lord did not come to them first. They did not then say the word. They would just say something and wait for God to fulfill it. Now, there's some really nice metaphorical language in here when the false prophets are described as daubing things with plaster. The plaster could then be easily destroyed by rain or wind, and it speaks to how insubstantial their words actually were. They really didn't have anything solid to say. And so reading with this metaphorical lens really gives a very vivid picture of the inefficacy of the false prophet's words. Now, in chapter 14 of Ezekiel, we have the elders and their idols. And this is a problem we'd seen before. The section itself begins another section with 2 world builders. First of all, the elders of Israel, certain elders of Israel, are introduced as characters. And this is followed by the prophetic citation formula again, Vayehi davar Adonai lemor, the word of the Lord came to me saying. Now, the elders are clearly indulging themselves in the twin sins of Israel. Number 1, they are turning away from God, and number 2, they are worshiping idols. The JPS version states that the idols are fetishes, which is a great term in English because it talks about, can be defined as an inanimate object of special devotion. Okay, so thus it's a good term for describing the gilulim, which might include, according to the Hebrew dictionary, trunks, blocks, or logs, or idols made of wood. These idols are described again in Psalm 115, 4 through 9, and a couple other places actually, in something that would be termed a taunt song, describing the idols as having eyes that do not see and ears that do not hear. But look what our God has. So that's a nice psalm to go back on to see what use the psalmist himself was making of the idea of the inefficacy of the idols. Now, the elders are instructed to repent, in other words, to turn back to God. And Ezekiel 4:8 says that God will act. God will act so that you will know that I am the Lord. Ezekiel 14:11 gives us a ray of hope here with a reflection of the Exodus formula. They shall be my people, and I will be their God. Ezekiel 14:14 mentions that even very righteous people such as Noah, Daniel, and Job could only save themselves in such a situation. It's going to be so desolate. Okay, Noah and Job are likely the biblical characters that we are familiar with, whereas Daniel possibly could be a hero of ancient folklore who was a person who saved both himself and his family. Nonetheless, even though we may or may not be able to identify Daniel, all of these are in right relationship with God. 4 punishments are mentioned here, and they all are familiar ideas within an ancient Near Eastern worldview. The sword being a shorthand for the entire battle scenario, famine, wild beast, and pestilence. All of these things probably would follow one right after the other in such a devastating situation. And indeed, we get this sort of mention of Jerusalem being a haunt for jackals in the book of Jeremiah. In other words, it's completely empty. I sort of picture an old Western with a little bit of tumbleweed going across the road and just the sound of the wind blowing. So we have this idea that this is serious. It's going to happen. It's going to happen now. One of the reasons being people are not speaking correctly about God, and the other being that they're worshiping idols rather than worshiping God himself. So all of these things set us up for the discussion of the judgment to come. Is this judgment actually a righteous judgment that God's going to place on them? And who actually is God judging? Is God judging the ancestors, or is God judging the people themselves? And this is a topic that we'll take up in our forum post this week. So I'm looking forward to seeing your explorations into that. Okay, more to come very soon. We'll talk to you later.